All right, I'm making this video as sort of a DIY cautionary tale. So this is a DIY repair that came to me, and it just is just incredible frustration is what this board screams at me. And I wanted to sort of, walk you through the kinds of things that can happen if you're not experienced doing iPhone repair, and it's kind of like I've noticed that people that I've trained and people that I've met, I'm always encouraging people to, you know, if you're DIY, use an iFixit guide and give cell phone repair a shot. But people tend to either be, have a certain natural precision and carefulness, or they generally don't. And I'm not sure that you can change that if you don't. One of the best people that I've ever seen as far as a natural ability to repair phones is an 11-year-old girl named Katie, and she did an iPhone 5 screen replacement, and her precision was just absolutely spot on. She paid attention, she asked questions, she really cared about the repair, and she was neither too gentle nor too rough, and I think that she is just a natural for cell phone repair. And if you compare that to some other people that I've worked with that just tend to always kind of get into these, connector damage problems or, screw mix-up problems, things like that, I think there is sort of an argument for, maybe not everybody should try to do repair. And if you're in that latter category, I want to kind of walk you through this phone to see what that looks like. This guy that sent in this phone is largely unaware of the extent of the damage to his phone. He's been trying to troubleshoot it. It's really frustrating for him, and we can we can kind of take a look through this phone, and I'll highlight some problems, and maybe you guys can learn a thing or two. Let's start with a microscope exam. So I've been working on this phone for quite a bit today, and I want to kind of show you where I've been and what I still have to do. So this phone was sent to me for a battery percentage problem, and that's the primary problem according to the end user. So we can see that this camera at the top is relatively mal-seated. There's some tool marks here. If we look here at the front camera connector, here's where place I've been working. Initially, someone had run a tool down this camera connector, and all of those pins were bridged together just from using some sort of a blunt tool. The connector looks pretty good, and I've reflowed all of those joints. He's missing a component right there that is just standard garden variety, what we call technician damage. I put back this component right there. If you look closely here at the compass IC, there's a big chunk out of it. So there's a chip on the compass IC, and that's just tool damage. Usually when you start a phone, this is covered with a sticker, and so you don't realize that there's a component under there when you're doing connect and disconnect. If we look here at the screw hole, that's the wrong screw's been shoved in there a couple of times, something way too big. Now if this was a 5S, that would be a serious problem because of the 5S long screw damage problem when the trace is underlying that screw. In the 5, there's just a ground plane under there, so I don't think that this is going to really cause a serious problem there. If we look at the next screw hole, same thing, using the wrong screw multiple times. So this to me is troubleshooting damage. There's been a lot of frustration, opening this up and trying again. We can see that there's a lot of flecks of conductive material on this board. This is all, like little bits and remnants of solder paste. So there was some soldering going on this board using paste. Here's a conductive piece of metal. Any of that can easily short together the phone and cause a big problem. There's a lot of dirt in here. Let's continue on. So here at the power flex connector, This has got some technician damage. Both ends of this connector should look like the bottom end. So this connector gets its strength from these anchor pieces of metal. And you can see on this one that's been mashed down. That's going to weaken the end of the connector. And with repeated connect-disconnect cycles, it will actually cause damage to the connector. Right now, I think you can get away with it. I think it's still okay. The good news, he doesn't have any pry damage. That's a classic on the iPhone 5 from prying out the battery on the board side. So the U3 chip and all the surrounding components are intact. When I first looked at the board, I found an extra component sitting right there, but I washed that away. This, I think, is the biggest problem in this phone, potentially. So this is a baseband chip that really is very sensitive, and it really doesn't like to get you see there's a chip, a nick in that IC chip. And this I've seen before where even a smaller nick than that on that chip will cause the phone to not be able to find cell service. So this chip is very difficult to replace, and it's really glued on there with underfill. It's very difficult to remove that chip without ripping up the pads that are under that chip. So I generally don't take that repair. This I'm not sure whether or not that this nick in that chip is actually going to cause that problem, or if he can get away with it. Maybe the chip's okay. I don't know. And so that kind of further confounds my job, where if I'm going to work on this phone, it may end up unrepairable for use as a cell phone, but it might end up just being an iPod Touch. It looks like we've got some wrong screw over tightening problems going on in this screw hole, and you can see what happens here. You have a screwdriver slip that your screwdriver just knocks off, and that's how you get that sort of nick on the baseband chip there. So I really recommend for these standoff screws that go in here. Here's one that's still present. Using this standoff driver. I can't get the right angle here, but it is absolutely perfect for that hole. Let me show you guys what that looks like. This thing, I love this screwdriver. I ordered a bunch of them from China, and this is so great. I may even sell them on my website, because this tool is perfect for all those standoff screws. And everybody that comes to the course, wants to take one home with them. So I may end up making these available. So, using the right tools for the job, the pros almost exclusively use the WeHa drivers. They just are very grippy, very durable, and they keep you from making these kinds of mistakes on the board. All right, let's keep going on our tour of this board. I put back some components that were missing. There was a missing component there. There's a missing component. This guy was missing. So, I'm kind of just been filling in the gaps here. And now we get to what's really this guy's primary problem, which is right here. So this is my jumper that I've put here. Now I'll go ahead and take it off so that I can illustrate for you what the deal is with this. So this is what he considers the primary problem of the board, which is a battery percentage and boot looping problem. So let's take this off so that I can, this was sort of a troubleshooting jumper that I put on, and it does work, so that's why I'm going back into this phone to try to make it, to go ahead with the repair here. So I'm just going to take that off. All right, and I'll show you what we had initially. Okay, so when I got this phone, it looked a little bit worse than it does right now in this area. You can see that the battery connector itself has 4 pins. And like all battery connectors, there's 4 lines here. This is the ground, this is the positive line, and then there's 2 data lines that the battery needs to talk to the board through through these pins. So the first is a battery gas gauge line, and the second, or the first is a battery temperature line, and the other is a battery gas gauge or battery percentage line. So this line has to have a path to talk to the board, and it requires continuity from the pin to the board. And that line has on it a tiny component that looks like all of these, except it's not a capacitor. All of these components here are capacitors, and capacitors themselves, in this case, are not inline components. They are sort of providing a pathway to ground, so they only have sort of one foot on the line and the other foot on ground. And if you knock one of them off, it'd be nice to put it back, but if it's absolutely impossible, then it's fine to just sort of leave it off, and you probably won't notice a defect if you're missing one or even maybe two, or who knows, maybe even all of them. But here, this is just so heartbreaking. This pad used to be connected to a filter, which is an inline component, like a drawbridge. If you wash out a drawbridge, you're not going to have flow through the road anymore. So there's a pad here, and then at one time there was a pad also there. And this is, if that filter is gone, it's a relatively straightforward microsoldering job to just sort of use hot tweezers, pick up a filter from a donor board or order one, and then place it, and you're done. But it's a real challenge without the right tools, and it's a real challenge without microscopy. So this looks like an incredibly frustrating ordeal for this guy, who has clearly been attempting this repair. This entire area was filled with solder paste beads, which I've since cleaned out, and there's a lot of exposed ground from him just sort of rubbing these pads with braid or something. All of that exposed ground is a bit of a risk, because if this line connects to ground, or if this line accidentally connects to ground, you can see how easy that is, especially if you're using solder paste and there's solder balls everywhere. That is going to just short this line into the ground, and that's not going to solve the problem. So this repair here is a challenge, and our goal here is that we need to be able, I put back these two caps, they were both missing, and I'm not going to risk placing a cap on these two pads. I'm going to let the phone sort of get by without it. But the filter is required, and he's dug through the entire first layer and down to the second layer and into a ground layer of that board. There is no option anymore to place a filter, and there's really not even an option, in my opinion, to attempt to connect to the stem of the trace that used to support the old filter because of this exposed ground. You couldn't tin that center dot there, which is probably the trace, without also tinning the surrounding copper. So that means in order to get this problem solved, which is one of many on this phone, I would need to place a jumper to bring continuity from the pin itself over to just this pad. And that's what I that's what I had done, and I made it sort of tall and standing up here because I wanted to test to see whether or not this would actually solve the problem. In order to sort of complete this repair, I'm going to need to cover and mask all of this exposed ground, and then attempt to place the jumper straight on that pad. So I will put this jumper back just so we can kind of continue troubleshooting this phone. Okay, so now we have a reasonable connection, at least for troubleshooting. Let's try to pull that up a little bit. There we go. From the pad, and then in lieu of the filter, this jumper connects straight to the pin. So now the battery should be able to get the information that it needs in order to not shut off or fail to update the battery percentage. So all phones need to have this, this line intact. All phones, all iPads, they all have a battery gas gauge line. And a lot of times it's, those components, there's a filter that's sort of, in line with that path. And it's easy in a lot of devices to kick off that filter with, sort of the same technician damage, using the wrong tools or clumsy fingers. And how the device responds, however, is different. So in the iPhone 5, the device will respond by turning on just fine, but you'll notice the battery percentage never goes up. So a lot of times that's interpreted as a charging problem, and so people will troubleshoot charging problem. And then after a while, the device will fail to get that information from the battery, and so it'll just kick off. In some devices it will boot loop, in some devices it will blue screen, but in the iPhone 5 it will just kick off and then it will restart, and it will continue to do that continuously. In the iPad mini, the same thing happens, but the device does not boot loop. It will just fail to update the battery percentage unless you run the battery down to where it can't support the device. So the device won't know that it has a low battery, and so then you may see a boot loop if you have a very low battery percentage. But in all of these cases, the battery charging is okay. This is just sort of a reporting problem. So if we kind of continue looking at this phone, we can see that, this was probably one of the early problems in this phone, and the natural thing to assume would be that this is a charging problem because you don't see that battery percentage updating, and so you're going to go down that road, and we can see that we see some missing components damage around the dock connector. And then if we look over here, we can see that this is a replacement charge port, so I see a misseated loudspeaker down there, missing screws here on the dock. This is part of the charge port here, and that is probably okay to just kind of shore that back up. And then here on the loudspeaker, I was just a second ago looking at a question on iFixit where someone was asking, hey, I just replaced my dock connector and now I don't have loudspeaker function out of one side. And you can see, let's look from far away. This stuff is tiny. That this guy's knocked off a component there and also right there in the glue, and that's going to give him a problem with the loudspeaker. If we look really closely, we can see that there's also a micro tear here on the flex, so that's torn, and that's not good either. So this phone really needs a new dock connector, if it's actually able to be solved. It needs to get these screws filled in, loudspeaker seated correctly. This problem needs to be resolved. I need to reseat that guy, but I need to sort of go through here and fill in all of the missing components. I've put in, I don't know, maybe half a dozen of them that were just sort of kicked off around the place. This I probably would not address right now because the connector can probably function, but I would just be a little bit worried about that. And then, there's just a lot of conductive material all over the place. Probably it would be best to just remove the compass IC and give up on going geocaching because it's damaged, and that can cause a problem here at the proximity sensor. There's conductive material sort of glued on over there. And then let's see, I don't notice anything jumping out at me over here. So this is a lot of damage. And then if we kind of look at the screen for this phone, so here's the screen that it's clearly a replacement screen. And if we look at the screen itself has a problem. It has the exposed backlight flex problem, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this is a replacement screen, and you can see these 3 solder lines that are on the LCD Flex itself. In the original screen, this is covered with a piece of black tape, and in many of the sort of most replacement screens will have a piece of Captain tape there, if not the original black tape. And the reason is because this is the backlight line, which is the highest voltage in the phone. And you can just see and imagine how easy it would be if you were installing this screen, with the exposed backlight flex right there, that if you installed the screen in the phone, how easy it would be to short that high voltage line to ground on the, any part of the frame. And that's going to blow a backlight filter and really, be a problem. It's another board repair. So we will help him out and cover that up. And in general, just looking at this screen, you can tell that this is the kind that comes with the small components installed, it looks like to me. And that's generally a bad idea because those components tend to have a higher defect rate. So then you'll get like red screen failures in the 5S, and you'll end up needing to replace those. And, certainly never, ever, ever, never, ever, ever buy a screen with an aftermarket home button. With error 53 that is bricking phones left and right, you have to transfer your original home button. And this one I can't tell whether or not that it looks like an aftermarket home button. That looks pretty solidly on there. That doesn't look like a transfer of the original home button. I don't know. Maybe it is. That gasket is wrong. All right, I take it back. That's probably, I don't know. That's hard to tell. It's either really low quality work from your supplier, yeah, or that's on there wrong, or just a transferred home button that's not really doing that well. All right, so what are we gonna do? So with this repair, I'm going to go ahead and test it now, because I have put this sort of temporary solution in place. If the phone works and it looks repairable, then I will go ahead and cover all of the exposed ground, clean it up, and then apply a jumper overlaid on top of the conformal coating or some sort of epoxy to prevent it from ever touching the ground. And then I'm most concerned about this chip. I'm not going to replace that chip. That's too dangerous. And then I'm going to leave the power connector alone. I think there's still a couple more components that I need to source from my donor board and plug in and kind of go through and clean this board up. Really, I think I'm going to pull it out. It needs a bath trip through the ultrasonic cleaner. And then, I'm going to advise the customer that he needs a new dock. This dock may charge, but I'm going to guess that there's going to be a headphone jack problem. So let's test. So the deal with this phone is, I need to know whether or not it can find cell service, because that really is going to separate whether or not this phone is actually a candidate for full repair or not. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put on I'm going to try to eliminate as many variables as I can. So I'm going to put on a known dock connector. And it's important for everyone to have known good parts, so if you're doing cell phone repair, you need to have a bucket that is got a known good screen, known good battery, known good small parts, and have more than one, because as you use these things, you're going to find that they will go bad because you're doing a lot of disconnect cycles on them. So you need to have a couple of extras as well. So I'm putting back on his interconnect cables, and I have put in here my own phone's active SIM, because that's what I really care about. So I'm putting back on all these cables. I'm going to leave his power button off, and I don't want to sort of risk it with that. And then we will troubleshoot his screen. So I think I told you I just had to take a break for it was bus time, so I made a clip and hit stop. So I don't remember what I just told you or not, but I just covered the backlight flex because it was exposed, so we can safely test this screen that he sent. And if it has a backlight problem, this board could have a backlight problem. I can't tell that right now. Then we will put on a known good screen and troubleshoot that. So we will install this screen. And the screen, I think we walked through it. You know, it's not a great screen to begin with, so I'm hoping it's okay. I know that, you know, when you start really getting into a lot of component replacements plus board repair, you know, that can be a problem. The front camera flex, the prox flex, I'm going to leave off as well because I know I can see some components that are missing, and so I don't want to cause that to, you know, any errors for that. I've got a known good battery, so since we're troubleshooting battery, I want to use a known good battery, and I will plug that in. And so the primary defect in this phone is the fact that it doesn't update the battery percentage because it has no gas gauge line. And then it would also boot loop. So we'll see if that's solved, and we'll see if it can find service. That's really what I'm most worried about. Okay, so we will prompt this phone to boot with a charger. And, you know, again, you can just overlay the dock connector and then without installing it, because, you know, we've just seen that it's difficult to you know, manage all those little bits and pieces. All right, so we've got everything kind of nailed down. So let's see what this phone can do. We're trying to figure out whether or not it can find service mostly. If it can, then it makes it sort of a candidate for overall repair. And then we're seeing whether or not this jumper solution will actually solve the gas gauge defect. Now, one thing that I can't show you is that if you are troubleshooting a gas gauge problem, you can use the iBackupBot tool. And I've shown that in another video, but I've lost my ability for now to show you my screen. All right, so we've got some flicker in this screen, but that's okay. That and a little bit of lines. So it's on. It's at 93%. And we will see if it can charge, and we will see if it can stay on. So I'm going to click over here to iBackupBot, which is a third-party tool that lets you kind of read the real-time log on the phone. And something like a gas gauge error you'll see in the log. So if this log will either have gas gauge errors or it will not. So we'll sort of be able to know in advance whether or not this repair is robust, or if it's, you know, giving some kind of other error from all this other damage on the phone. So let's look at the tool system log. All right, so it's looks pretty standard. You know, all phones are gonna cry about one thing or another, but there's no repeatable serious error. It's got like a couple of app errors, and it sees Wi-Fi. Carrier service is available. Cellular data plan is enabled. All right, let's see. It's found service. So I put my active SIM in here, and this phone has 5 bars of AT&T. So that's fantastic. That's great. So that really changes the picture for this repair. So assuming that I don't see any gas gauge errors, so we will let this phone kind of sit here for a while and see if it can actually increase from 93%. Can it actually charge? And then does it actually stay on? So assuming that we've solved those problems, that just leaves the phone with, overall, conductive material, so ultrasonic cleaning it needs, and then, assorted tiny little components that are missing. I think I'm going to leave the power flex connector alone because it's okay. And then it's just a question of the dock. And this is tough for me, where, it's funny in life, and I feel like, one of these sort of like Lewis-like rants, but, it's funny in life how you often have an occasion to sort of, kind of hope for or wish for some extra special treatment that is a sort of above and beyond general service. So if you go to a restaurant, you might want to sit at a table that is by the window, or you might want to you might like it if your postman brings your packages up to the door and leaves them on your porch instead of leaving them out in the driveway. These little extra courtesies that people can do for you or not do for you, but still sort of be within the confines of their job. And I remember my mom was really good at sort of connecting with people and inspiring them to do all these kindnesses, and she didn't do it intentionally. It was just who she was, and I really admired that just wherever she went, she was funny, and people liked her. She would do little things for people all the time, and it really came back to her, especially when she was she was dying of cancer, and the support from the community was overwhelming at how many lives she touched in these tiny little ways. And I'd really like to teach my children the ability to kind of connect with people, and the ability to just find a way of being in the world where you inspire little extras, little kindnesses. And so now I'm in a position here where this guy needs, this looks like this is going to work, and this guy's going to need a new dock connector. And given the state of this phone, I think that the chance that he will personally be able to install a new dock connector and have it work out, totally fantastic, is probably low. And so, as a courtesy, I could put a dock connector in here for him. It's kind of a big job. It's kind of, a bigger job than something you generally do for free for somebody. And I could do that, or I could choose not to. And it's funny how little things will sort of guide that decision. I probably will, because it's hard for me not to. But if anybody was not going to get a courtesy dock connector out of me, it would probably be this guy, because he is just he's a piece of work. He's sending me these kind of devices that are really sad cases without a real awareness of how badly they're damaged. And then he's right now he's furious at me for he doesn't like the assembly job on a no-fix MacBook that he sent to us disassembled, and he's unhappy about timing and communication. And I'm trying to sort of say, hey, we're closed on the weekends and we're not answering 3 a.m. texts anymore. And he's just sort of blown away by our unprofessionalism. And it's funny how customers can have like a really different experience of the same business, where there's another guy last week who was so overwhelmingly grateful about his data recovery that he called us to say he wants to be in a commercial for us, and he thinks that we should be charging twice as much for data recovery, and he can't believe that we were able to get done what we got done for him. And the business manager Sunday said, well, thanks for taking the time to like tell us the good stuff, because it's really easy. You usually hear from just people that are complaining about things. And he said, well, somebody's complaining about you guys. Who's complaining? You give me their number, I am going to go punch them in the face. I thought that was hilarious that he kind of chose to say that, while at the same time, the next guy was like, you guys are so unprofessional, you're the worst, or we're missing a screw, or it's just funny how human nature works. All right, let's take a look at this. Okay, 95% charged, and it has stayed on this whole time. So I think that, and it still has cell service. So this phone, I think, is going to be repairable. So now I'm gonna have to make, I'm gonna have to make a hard decision. I wonder what you guys would do. Would you guys, put in a dock connector for this guy just to be nice and kind of, because already this is well over what our quote was for him, way, way, way beyond that. So I don't know. I'm interested in the comments to hear what your business decision would be on a guy that is just super pissed, and when you kind of have to make that decision of whether or not you're gonna do these little kindnesses. I don't know. I'm interested to see what you think. All right, but I'm gonna finish up this foam, and I think it actually is gonna come back totally fine. So so for you guys doing DIY, this is a cautionary tale. It sometimes can be harder than you think if you don't have that precision element to your personality. All right, and we'll call that a day.